By the time Callie Brandt reached the ridge, the frost was painted with blood and silence. The early light had just begun to crawl down the mountainside, turning the snow a pale blue. Her breath rose in trembling clouds as she froze in place, eyes locking on a sight she would never forget. 3 dogs, big, heavy-chested shepherd mixes, were circling something near a fallen cedar. Their barking echoed through the valley, raw and frenzied. Then she saw what they were hunting. A bobcat, her fur streaked with crimson, stood trembling but defiant, protecting a small shape pressed beneath a hollow log. The mother cat lunged once more, claws flashing, and one of the dogs yelped in pain. It bought her only seconds. The pack came again, faster this time. Callie shouted without thinking, her voice cracking the air. "Hey, get out of here!" She grabbed a rock and hurled it. The sound startled them just enough for her to close the distance, heart hammering, stick raised high. The dogs hesitated, then turned and vanished down the slope, tails low. The silence that followed was worse than the noise. The bobcat was still upright, but barely. Her ribs rose and fell shallowly. One eye was already glazed. When Callie knelt down, the wild cat's gaze flicked to her once, fierce and fading. It wasn't fear she saw there. It was something closer to recognition. The bobcat's head turned toward the hollow where a tiny spotted kitten whimpered, one eye swollen shut. Then she let out a low rasp, almost like a sigh, and went still. Callie's throat tightened. She pressed a gloved hand to her mouth and whispered, "Oh no, you were trying to save her." The kitten didn't move. Only the faint sound of breathing, quick and shallow, betrayed life. Callie had worked as a park ranger for years before her breakdown, before she'd come to this remote corner of British Columbia to start over. She'd seen injured wildlife before, but this was different. This was a mother's last stand. She pulled off her jacket, wrapping the trembling kitten inside. The little body was ice cold. "Hang in there, sweetheart," she murmured, not sure why she used the same voice she once used with wounded hikers. From habit, she checked for cell signal. A single bar. Enough. She called the Wild Heart Sanctuary in Fort Castor. "This is Callie Brandt," she said, trying to steady her voice. "I've got an orphaned hot bobcat kitten. The mother's dead, attacked by dogs." A calm male voice answered. "Dr. Elias Monroe speaking. Can you describe the injuries?" Callie glanced at the small form in her arms. "Eye trauma, shock, maybe 4 months old. Keep her warm and quiet. Don't feed. We're sending a field team." Callie sat there on the cold ground, jacket wrapped tight around the kitten, the dead mother beside her. The forest had gone still except for the distant river. She whispered softly, "She fought for you. You're safe now." But she wasn't sure who she was trying to comfort, the kitten or herself. Somewhere deep in the trees, the wind shifted, carrying the faint scent of pine and smoke. Callie looked back at the mother one last time and promised silently she would not let this end here. The sound of tires on gravel stirred Callie from her silent vigil. A white truck marked with the Wild Heart Sanctuary emblem pulled up just beyond the trailhead, crunching frost under its wheels. 2 figures climbed out. Dr. Elias Monroe, tall and calm with graying temples and a duffel slung over one shoulder, and Neela Crow, a wildlife biologist with soft eyes and sharp instincts. They moved with quiet urgency, boots crunching through ice-laced grass. Elias crouched beside Callie, his gaze immediately drawn to the motionless bobcat and then to the small, bundled shape cradled in her arms. "You did the right thing," he said softly, his voice like warm cedar. "Let's have a look." Callie unfolded the jacket slowly, revealing the trembling kitten inside. One of her eyes was clamped shut, crusted with dried blood. The other blinked slowly, dazed and dull. Elias reached into his kit for gloves, while Neela prepared a carrier lined with heated blankets. "She's hypothermic," Elias said. "And that eye? We'll need to operate within hours if we're going to save it." Callie's hands lingered on the edge of the jacket before she finally let go. The kitten gave a weak hiss as Elias lifted her, but it was more reflex than resistance. She was far too exhausted to fight. Neela gently closed the carrier door and covered it with a towel to dim the light. "We'll stabilize her on the way." "You coming with us?" Elias asked. Callie hesitated. Her boots were wet, her jacket was blood-stained. But something deep inside her said she wasn't done yet. She nodded. "Yes, I want to see her through." The ride to the sanctuary was long, winding through snow-dusted roads that cut through dense forest. Callie sat in the back seat, one hand resting lightly on the top of the carrier, feeling every tremble of the road beneath her. No one spoke much. The air was heavy with anticipation. The Wild Heart Sanctuary wasn't large, but it was nestled in a protected valley with heated enclosures, a surgical suite, and an emergency clinic. Volunteers bustled around as they arrived, ushering them straight into the exam room. Bright lights snapped on, and the kitten was lifted onto a padded table. Elias worked quickly and with precision, flushing the eye, administering antibiotics, and assessing the bruises. "She's got puncture wounds along the ribs and shoulder. Probably from the mother, trying to carry her while injured," he murmured. Neela, watching from the side, whispered, "She hid her baby under that log. Even bleeding out, she protected her." Callie stood near the door, fingers clenched around the strap of her pack. That image of the mother Bobcat, still snarling even as her strength gave out, was burned into her memory. Elias looked up. "We're prepping for surgery now. You can wait in the observation room." She nodded and stepped out, but not before brushing a hand against the carrier's side. "You're not alone, little one," she whispered. Hours passed. Callie sat watching through the observation glass, knees drawn to her chest. She barely noticed when someone brought her tea. The memory of the mother's last breath looped through her thoughts like a prayer unanswered. Finally, Elias emerged, mask dangling from one ear, exhaustion written across his face. "She made it through," he said. "She's a fighter." Callie exhaled for the first time in what felt like days. The relief hit her harder than expected. She turned toward the window, blinking hard. Through the glass, the kitten slept under a warming blanket, small chest rising and falling. Alive, healing. And for the first time since her retreat into the mountains, Callie felt something fragile and fierce stir inside her. Hope. The first few days were uncertain. The kitten, who Elias simply called the little one, remained withdrawn, curled tight against the far wall of her enclosure. She refused food, hissed weakly if approached, and trembled at every sound. But she was alive. That mattered most. Callie returned to the sanctuary every morning, even when no one expected her to. She never asked for permission. She didn't hover or try to touch. She just sat outside the glass, book in hand, reading aloud in a soft voice. Nature field guides, old ranger journals, even poetry when she ran out of stories. The act felt foolish at first, but she remembered how sound carried in the woods, how her own breathing once calmed a fawn tangled in wire. Maybe the kitten would listen. Maybe it would mean something. On the fourth morning, something changed. Callie was halfway through a story about a bear cub that wandered into a logging camp when the kitten stirred. One ear twitched, then the other. She didn't approach, didn't lift her head, but she listened. Neela noticed too. She leaned in from the hallway, smiling. She's starting to associate your voice with calm. That's good. I'm not trying to tame her, Callie said quickly. She's wild. She needs to stay wild. Neela nodded. Of course. But right now she needs to feel safe. Trust isn't domestication. It's survival. That afternoon, the team gathered to discuss the next steps. The kitten's eye was healing well, better than expected. The swelling had gone down, and though clouded, it responded to light. But physically healing her was only the beginning. Elias spoke with folded arms, leaning against the counter. She's too young to survive on her own. Normally, her mother would teach her to hunt, to stay hidden, to fear humans. We have to figure out how to replace that. Jake Hanlon, a grizzled volunteer who once worked as a trapper before turning to conservation, scratched his beard. She needs a wild mentor, not humans, not cages. That's not easy to find, Neela said. We can't just drop her in the woods and hope instinct fills the gaps. Jake looked thoughtful. I might know someone, or rather, some cat. They all turned. There's a female bobcat up at the Timberline Sanctuary near Cranbrook. Mags. She's older, three-legged from an old snare injury. Can't be released. But she's raised 2 orphaned litters before. Took to it like it was her calling. Elias tilted his head. Could she handle one more? If we do the introduction right, Jake replied. She just might. It took 2 weeks to arrange the transfer. Paperwork, medical clearances, transport permits. All while Callie kept her daily vigil outside the enclosure, and the kitten, now called Juniper or Junie, slowly began to emerge. She took food from tongs now, but only if Callie held them. She explored her space cautiously, her gait still uneven but improving. One day, as snow began to fall lightly outside, Junie approached the glass. She placed a paw against it. Callie's breath caught in her throat. Wordless, she mirrored the gesture, palm to paw, glass between them. It lasted only seconds, but the moment rooted itself inside Callie like an anchor. Something had passed between them. Something neither could explain, but both understood. And when the day came to move Junie to Timberline, Callie insisted on going with her. She needed to see this next chapter, needed to know the little one wasn't just surviving, but moving towards something greater, something wild, something free. The Timberline Sanctuary sat on the edge of a long-forgotten mining town, nestled between ridgelines that caught the afternoon sun just right. Snowmelt whispered down from the peaks and pooled in icy creeks that crisscrossed the land. It felt older than the map it appeared on, like a place time hadn't quite figured out how to tame. Callie hadn't been here since before the breakdown, back when she wore a badge and carried bear spray instead of books. But something about the place steadied her. Familiar. Quiet. Just enough wild to feel like truth. The drive up had been silent, save for the soft rustle of blankets inside the transport carrier. Juniper was calm, alert but not frantic. She'd grown in just those few weeks, sleeker, stronger. Her good eye was sharp, the damaged one still slightly clouded, but no longer infected. When they arrived, a lean woman with silver braids met them at the gate. Dr. Patricia Lorne, she said, extending a hand with sun-worn skin. But everyone calls me Patch. She crouched near the carrier and tilted her head, studying Junie through the mesh. So, this is the little spirit who survived the ridge. Let's see if Mags thinks she's worth mentoring. The introduction was delicate. Patch had set up a large enclosure with a mesh divider, giving the 2 bobcats space to see and smell each other without contact. Mags appeared first, bigger than Junie by far, with a thick winter coat and a missing back leg. She moved with the awkward grace of someone who'd adapted long ago. Her face bore the quiet, unreadable calm of a cat who'd seen much and offered little. Junie crouched low, ears flattened. She didn't hiss, didn't bolt, just watched. Mags approached the mesh slowly. Then, to everyone's quiet astonishment, she made a low churring sound, almost like a purr, but deeper. A greeting. Juniper responded with a soft chirp, barely audible. Her ears lifted. The silence that followed felt sacred. Elias whispered, "That's the first time I've seen Mags initiate." Callie's chest tightened. She hadn't realized she'd been holding her breath. Over the next days, the bond grew, cautious but steady. Patch monitored their progress like a hawk. They began allowing brief, supervised contact in the shared space, with Mags tolerating the kitten's presence, then slowly engaging, correcting her with gentle swats, teaching boundaries. The older cat began demonstrating hunting postures, crouching near scattered feathers, waiting in stillness before leaping with surprising agility for her three-legged frame. Juniper watched everything, mimicked movements, practiced in her own clumsy way. "It's working," Neela said during a check-in call. "She's learning, not just to survive, to be wild." Callie stayed for nearly 2 weeks, helping with chores, sleeping in the small staff cabin, rising at dawn to watch the 2 cats through the viewing blind. She didn't speak much, didn't need to. Just watching Juniper slowly unfold into herself brought something to life in Callie, too. One evening, after feeding rounds, Patch joined her by the fence. The sun was setting, and both bobcats lay stretched near each other, drowsy and full. "You know," Patch said softly, "not every orphan finds a guide. Some get stuck in that fear, that memory of the last bad moment. But not her." Callie nodded. "She's still carrying it, though. I can see it. The flinch when someone walks too close. The way she avoids loud noises. We all carry something," Patch replied. "It's not about forgetting. It's about not letting the wound lead." That night, as the wind howled gently through the pine needles, Callie lay awake and thought about the bobcat's mother, about the sound she'd made as she turned toward her dying breath. Protecting, warning, loving. And she wondered if some instincts passed deeper than blood. If somehow Juniper had heard more than just the final cry. Maybe she'd inherited a memory, a lesson, a whisper of what it meant to endure. She closed her eyes and let that thought settle like snowfall, soft and unshakable. Spring came early that year, painting the high valleys in wet greens and golds. Patches of snow still clung to the shadows, but the air had changed. Lighter, cleaner, full of sound. Birds called through the trees, and somewhere out of sight, a creek ran wild and full. At Timberline, Juniper had grown into herself. Her coat thickened, muscles filling in. She moved with intent now, no longer the uncertain shuffle of a frightened orphan, but the low-slung grace of a predator. Still young, still learning, but different, stronger. One morning, Patch led Callie and Jake to the rear observation blind. "Watch this," she whispered. Mags had cached a quail carcass near a log the day before. Now Juniper crept forward on silent paws. She paused, ears flicking, then leapt, paws landing directly on the cache spot as if it were live prey, not sniffing, not wandering, direct, precise. Jake leaned in. She didn't find it. She knew it was there. Callie frowned. "You mean?" "That's what's strange," Patch said. "Mags didn't show her. She didn't watch her bury it. We made sure." Juniper dragged the carcass out and carried it to a shaded corner before eating, just as adult bobcats do when avoiding scavengers. Then she scraped dirt over the spot where she had eaten. Callie whispered, "How would she know to do that?" Pat shrugged. "Some things are taught, others passed on." They watched in silence as Juniper groomed herself, one paw raised delicately to her face. The same paw Callie remembered pressed against the glass weeks ago. It wasn't just instinct. It was memory shaped by grief. Later that day, Callie sat by the main cabin with Jake, sipping black coffee as wind teased the trees. "You ever seen anything like that before?" she asked. Jake shook his head. "I've tracked bobcats my whole life. Raised a few, released more. That level of behavior this early? No. Not unless she learned from someone before." "But she didn't," Callie said. "Not really. Her mother died before she could teach her." Jake rubbed the back of his neck. "Maybe not with lessons. But energy's a strange thing. Maybe she remembered the way her mother moved, the way she shielded her, carried her. Those last few seconds might have mattered more than we think." The theory clung to Callie. That memory could be physical. That survival wasn't just taught, but transferred through something invisible. That love could live in the bones. That night, as she walked past Juniper's enclosure, she saw the young bobcat watching her from a perch. They held eye contact for a long moment. Then Juniper blinked slowly, once, wordless, intentional. Callie smiled. She'd learned that gesture once in a field course. Among wildcats, a slow blink meant safety. It meant trust. The next day, Elias arrived with news. "It's time," he said. "She's ready for release." The words hit harder than Callie expected. She thought she'd feel pride, relief. But instead, a soft ache curled in her chest. She turned toward the enclosure, where Juniper now slept curled near Mags. The surrogate had done her job. The little one was no longer little, and Callie would have to let go. But not before the goodbye. Not before the final moment that would close the arc of the ridge and open the door to the wild. They chose a spot deep in the Columbia Basin, remote, thick with underbrush, threaded with streams and game trails. It was land protected from development, tucked far from roads or power lines, the kind of wild that had teeth and silence, where bobcats belonged. Callie hadn't slept much the night before. She'd packed and repacked her small rucksack, even though she wasn't the one being released. Elias had offered to drive alone, but she declined. She needed to be there. She needed to see it through. As the truck rumbled down the dirt road toward the release site, Juniper lay quiet in the back, her carrier covered with a dark cloth. She didn't pace, didn't cry, just breathed, slow and steady, like she knew. At the clearing, the team worked efficiently. Neela laid out the gear while Jake scouted the perimeter. Elias checked the carrier one last time, his hands gentle. Callie stood off to the side, her boots sinking into soft moss, eyes scanning the trees. There was no ceremony, no music, no speeches. Just the wind, a few startled birds, and the waiting world. "We'll open the door, step back, and let her decide," Elias said. "No coaxing, no talking." They positioned the carrier at the tree line. Callie knelt beside it. Her fingers brushed the latch. But she didn't open it just yet. Instead, she leaned in close, speaking in the quietest voice she had. "This is your forest now, Uni. Your story. Go write it." She flicked the latch. The door creaked open. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then Juniper appeared, head first, her ears alert, nose twitching. She tested the air, the scents, the space. Then, with a grace that seemed too large for her small frame, she stepped forward. One paw, then another. She paused at the edge of the grass, looked back. Her eyes found Callie, and for a heartbeat that stretched like a held breath, they saw each other. No sound, no gesture, just knowing. Then Juniper turned and slipped into the brush, her spotted coat vanishing into shadow and fern, gone. Jake cleared his throat roughly, turning away. Neela wiped her cheek with the back of her glove. Even Elias seemed quieter than usual. But Callie remained still, eyes fixed on where the undergrowth swayed for a moment longer, then settled. The silence after was total. Then a distant hawk called overhead, circling wide. "She didn't hesitate," Neela said softly. "She knew it was time." "She knew before we did," Elias replied. They packed up slowly. There was no rush. On the ride back, Callie stared out the window, one hand resting over her chest. She didn't speak, didn't need to. A storm rolled in that evening, soft and slow, like a sigh. Rain tapped against the roof of her cabin, and for the first time in years, Callie slept without dreams. Months passed. Spring gave way to summer, then to the slow gold of early autumn. Life at the sanctuary moved on. New rescues, new challenges, more injured animals carried through the same doors Juniper had once entered. But for Callie, something had shifted. She stayed on at Timberline longer than expected, first volunteering, then helping with field work. The weight she'd carried for years, the sleepless nights, the racing heart, the images she couldn't scrub from memory, had softened. It wasn't gone. But it no longer led her. On quiet mornings, she found herself walking the trails behind the sanctuary, a steaming mug in her hand, listening for sounds most people never noticed. She had started drawing again, too, sketching animals in the margins of her field notes, then on larger pads. She didn't show anyone. It wasn't for them. One sketch she kept folded in her journal, Juniper at the edge of the forest, just before she vanished, looking back. The eyes in the drawing weren't perfect, but the feeling was. Then, one day in late October, something happened. A trail cam captured an image at dusk. Elias called her into the lab, excitement hiding behind his usual calm. This was taken near the old cedar grove, about 20 kilometers from the release site. He turned the monitor toward her. The screen lit up with a photo. A bobcat, poised on a rock above a narrow creek, mid-step, lean, healthy, with powerful haunches and the faintest cloudiness in one eye. "That's her," Callie whispered. Her voice caught, not from doubt, but certainty. "That's Junie." The photo wasn't dramatic. No cinematic pose, no fanfare. Just a wild animal being exactly what it was meant to be. But to Callie, it felt like a message sent from the trees themselves. Juniper had survived. No, she had thrived. More sightings followed in the weeks ahead. Tracks in the snow, tufts of fur caught on branches, even a brief nighttime video of her stalking a hare. She had carved out territory. She had hunted, defended, endured. One day, Callie returned to the ridge. The same ridge where it all began. It was early morning, frost on the grass, the same sharp stillness in the air. She carried nothing with her but a blanket and a small carved wooden token shaped like a paw print. Jake's handiwork, left anonymously on her cabin steps weeks ago. She laid the token at the base of the old cedar log and sat, knees drawn to her chest, watching the valley breathe. A raven called from above. The wind shifted through the trees, and then, far off, just at the edge of vision, a figure appeared. At first, Callie thought it was imagination. a shape too perfect to be real. But it didn't vanish. The bobcat stood still on a low outcrop, ears forward, watching, not approaching, not fleeing, just there. Her eye caught the morning light, revealing the telltale cloudiness. It was her. Juniper. Whole. Wild. Callie didn't move, didn't speak. They simply held the moment like a shared breath. Then, with the same grace she'd shown on release day, Juniper turned and vanished into the timber, her form swallowed by light and pine. Callie smiled through the tears that welled up uninvited. She hadn't come to say goodbye, she had come to witness what came after. Juniper was no longer a symbol of pain or loss or even survival. She was proof of what happens when love doesn't end at the edge of the wild, when it chooses to follow, quietly, all the way through. The story of Juniper and her mother became more than memory. It became myth. Told in classrooms by Neela, shared at fire circles by Jake, whispered by new volunteers at Timberline who knew the facts, but not the feeling. Callie never corrected them. Let the stories grow wild like everything else out here. But in her own heart, she carried the truth. The version with the weight, the silence, the scent of pine and blood on frost. After the sighting on the ridge, she returned to her cabin in the highlands. It was quiet there. She liked that. On some evenings, she'd sit on her porch wrapped in a wool blanket, a cup of black tea in hand, and just listen. To wind, to owls, to the way the trees seemed to speak without words. She kept two things on the mantel above her fireplace. One was a framed trail cam photo of Juniper, mid-stride at dusk, eyes sharp. The other, a black and white pencil sketch she'd drawn of the mother bobcat, wounded, defiant, standing between death and her daughter. People often asked about the drawing. Callie never explained too much, just smiled, said it was a reminder of a moment that changed everything. The Wild Heart Sanctuary eventually established a new initiative, the Ridgeborn Project, focused on rescuing and rehabilitating wild-born predators that had lost their parents to human encroachment. Elias published a paper on the surrogate method. Patch retired, leaving Timberline in Neela's hands, and Jake, ever the reluctant sage, started leading wilderness education trips for local kids. Every so often, a new orphan would come in. Some made it, some didn't. But the work continued, quiet, persistent, healing. One late winter evening, a school group visited the sanctuary. After the tour, one of the children lingered, staring at the sketch on Callie's mantel. "Is that the mom?" the boy asked. Callie nodded. "She looks strong." She was. The child thought for a moment. Did the baby ever come back? Callie glanced out the window. Snow drifted lazily across the trees. Somewhere beyond them, a wild heart still beat. Maybe close, maybe far, but always part of this place. "She never really left," Callie said. The child smiled, as if that made perfect sense. That night, Callie sat outside under a sky so clear it felt carved from glass. A fox barked in the distance. Somewhere higher up the slope, something moved, silent, graceful, unseen. And Callie breathed deep. The ache of the past was still there, but it no longer held her down. It had become part of the story, part of the scar, part of the strength. Juniper had grown into the wild, and Callie had, in her own way, returned to it too. Two survivors, two stories, forever braided by one cry that had once cut through the pines and asked the world for help. And someone had answered, not with grand gestures, not with heroism, but with presence, with staying, with seeing it through. Sometimes that was enough to save a life. Sometimes That was enough to save two.